Game over, man. Game over. Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 544 for July 25th, 2023. And I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. I am back from the hills of Tennessee.
Oh, an old stomping ground for me, because I used to live in Tennessee for about, I think it was only 6 months. Yeah.
And we were far from Nashville.
You were not there. Yeah.
Anywhere near that.
You were in the more scenic route. Yeah.
We were.
Yeah, you were definitely in the hills, as you said.
Yeah. I think, though, that we might be done with the hills of Tennessee because the last time we went, I got COVID.
Yeah.
And it was not fun. And this time around, we get home and immediately my brother-in-law tests positive for COVID. So
was he there though, or was it?
Oh no, he was. Yeah, he was in the cabin with us. And there's actually a really good chance that he got it from my son, Sam, or both of them, perhaps, because we were halfway through the week. And we went to, one of the fun things that you can do there in Pigeon Forge. And Sam was very much out of it. And if, I know a lot of you listening, watching have never met my son or know anything about him, but let me tell you, this little guy is a ball of energy, an incessant ball of energy. So when he demonstrates fatigue, especially midday,
something's wrong.
Absolutely. And he wouldn't really, tell me that anything was wrong. He wasn't like overtly sick in the sense that he's like, vomiting or coughing a lot. Like he just seemed like he was completely in a different universe. Like his headspace was not of this realm. It was very strange. Just very quiet, had like this sorrow look on his face, which is just not him at all. I knew that he was out of it. And we get back to the cabin and he's just kind of moping around and just not feeling himself. And so my wife's theory, who is a pediatrician, for context. That is
so your very sly way of saying she's probably right with this theory.
She knows what she's talking about and is convinced that Sam caught some sort of mild version of COVID, which then he passed on to our 4-month-old who got a little bit more overtly sick. Again, it wasn't intense, like the early days of COVID. This was like a mild version of it.
Okay.
But he was a little bit more overtly sick and, the coughing and, struggling to sleep. So the last few days with my boys, it was a little bit of a whirlwind there.
Well, that's unfortunate.
But we never did test them. So we don't know for sure, but they were the only two that showed any signs of fatigue and feeling a little ill while we were there in the cabin. And then when we get home, it turns out that my brother-in-law on that last day had been feeling a little awful, a little icky.
Yeah, and if he was there and came in contact with them, that would only make sense.
And he was around the whole time because we had a huge cabin, so there was like 9 of us.
I think that's a fair theory. I was going to say maybe if you want to test this theory and see if COVID is somehow connected to this cabin, go without the kids and see what happens next time. And if someone catches it, then you're never going there again.
Well, I mean, this was a very different cabin than the one that I got sick at. It was still just that whole
was
area.
It the same? Was it the same grounds at least? Just a different cabin?
It was the Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg area, like that same space. We were just in a different, cabin area.
Well, maybe that place is haunted with COVID.
Maybe. And so I don't know what it is, but every time we go, someone falls ill with COVID. So
maybe Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon can be listening to write a sequel to Cabin in the Woods and base it off of this idea.
There's a horror film waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. At any rate, I was fine. I had a much better vacation.
Yeah, because you didn't get COVID this time.
Yeah. But I'm glad to be back, and I talked about this a little bit in our review episodes we did for Barbie and Oppenheimer, which are up right now. Please go and check those reviews out.
Perfectly color coordinated as well.
Yep,
Well, not perfectly.
great.
I wore pink for both
For
reviews
both
when
of
I
them.
shouldn't have. So I decided to try and mix it up a little bit here, JD. So the color we obviously associate with Barbie, the Barbie movie, is pink. That's kind of a running joke with it. But with regard to Christopher Nolan, I guess we kind of associate the color blue with him. In a lot of ways. So I'm wearing purple. I'm mixing the two together.
Okay.
So
There you
I
go.
tried to at
purple
least find
action.
some synergy here to represent Barbenheimer as we're talking about.
Absolutely. And it was a wild weekend. I got back from vacation. I didn't get a chance to see the films early. And I don't know who chose that week, probably my wife, as far as when we went on vacation. We went on vacation like the worst week in terms of the film cinema schedule, because the press screenings were earlier in the week. Monday for Barbie, Tuesday for Oppenheimer. I was in Tennessee, obviously, so I didn't get a chance to attend those.
Right.
And so I had to wait the entire week, and watching all of our friends go and see them beforehand and talk about them. And I felt so out of the loop. I was
especially the hype around them.
Up in the tower or in the house looking down at SpongeBob.
It's like your fellow critics were rubbing it in your face.
I was like, come on. I want to go see these movies so bad.
Must have made you feel like a bomb ready to go off.
A little bit, And so like, while we had fun on vacation, it was a relaxing time, but there was an element of, I kind of want this week to go by really fast so I can get home. Like, I just wanted to see this movie so badly. And so I get home, and I was able to see one Friday and then the other one the next day. And as we talked about in those review episodes, like the cinemas across the nation, just jam-packed. People.
Oh, we'll talk about it. We'll talk
ready
about
to go
this.
see these movies.
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to start this show. We're going to talk a little Barbenheimer box office.
Yeah.
And what that means in the context of much of the conversation we've had over the last few months in terms of the state of cinema, but also in context of the Hollywood strike, what that means. We'll also get into our updated Barbenheimer rankings. So last week on the show, 543, in case you missed it, Brennan and I did a combined, because Barbenheimer, right? It's a meshing of these two worlds. We did a combined ranking of Christopher Nolan and Greta Gerwig. Now, obviously, Gerwig's now only has 3 films. Last week it was just the 2.
I know.
Well,
and they still
technically
made our
you
top
hadn't
3
seen for first one. Yeah. So exactly. So we did a combined ranking of Gerwig and Nolan. It was a lot of fun, and we're going to update those rankings now with Oppenheimer and Barbie in the fold. So
Indeed.
we'll get to that, and then we'll round out the show with something perhaps a little unexpected, but in my mind is nostalgic and a lot of fun. So a little bit of context for any new listeners or viewers out there, if you're watching us on YouTube. But we launched InSession Film back in 2013, right?
Right.
And one of the more fun films of that year for me, I loved it, was Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim.
Yep.
Which we all did dirty. That film did not do great at the box office. I was so sad at the time, and I still am now. But that film came out. It was great, and it just celebrated very recently, its 10th anniversary, which somewhat blows my mind. But here we are 10 years later, so we're going to look back at Pacific Rim and talk about it and what makes it so much fun, and I think why its reputation is actually increased over the last 10 years.
Yeah. We've definitely noticed that. We'll talk about why we think that is, because I think there is a very specific reason for that.
For sure. So that is on the slate for this week. Let's go ahead and get to the box office. Let's talk a little Barbenheimer. And man, what a weekend it was. It was really fun seeing everybody tweet out not just photos of their their stylish outfits and the fun that they're having with their friends. But we saw many photos of just how busy and jam-packed these theaters were. The discourse in that regard was actually very, very exciting.
Yeah, I think I mentioned during one of our reviews, it was probably for Barbie, that when I went to go see it on a Sunday night, I could not find parking. I could not find a parking spot. I don't remember the last time that has happened to me.
It's insane.
Like the fact that we are apparently seeing some showings this heavily sold out. Again, that's something I can't really remember seeing, at least for some time. So it's almost like a nostalgic time for the movies. Back when we would go to the movies and see big blockbusters that we were excited for back in the day, whether it be Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or something like that. Yeah. And getting to the theater and realizing that we couldn't go see it because they were sold out.
Yeah.
I feel like that's happening here. Like,
and that's
so interesting.
And that's where it gets interesting in terms of the conversation we've had about the current state of cinema.
Yeah.
And while I am not inherently opposed to, let's say, what Marvel has done with the MCU, I have mostly enjoyed the MCU. Mm-hmm. But there really is no denying that it has churned out perhaps an evil that isn't great when you consider all of these IPs that we see now that are trying to mimic and recreate the success of the MCU.
Yep.
And so that is mostly what we get from major studios, which we've talked about quite a bit over the last few months. But the other side of that coin is that we just get a lot of those movies now, right? Like we get 3 Marvel movies a year. There's the DC movies. There's, Jurassic Park or whatever franchise.
We get a lot of Disney-owned properties nowadays, and they're usually based on something. And we haven't even acknowledged this yet, but next weekend we've got Haunted Mansion coming out, which is not really IP, but it is based on Disney property. It's a thrill. It's a thrill ride, right? But a lot of these Disney-owned movies, they carry a similar energy, right? That audiences, I think, now can sort of associate these distributed films with each other, whether it be a Marvel movie or a Star Wars property or something like Haunted Mansion or one of these live action remakes. There's this weird, like, indirect sense of synergy between them. And I think audiences are kind of picking up on that sense of repetition, which is maybe what made the excitement for Barbenheimer so high, because it felt like something different.
Well, to me, it's not even just the redundancy of it, although I do agree with what you're saying. But to the point I was trying to make, we get so many of them that they don't feel like events.
Right.
Barbenheimer was an event. It was something that we all talked about for months at a time. As great as the marketing was for Barbie, Oppenheimer less so, but it's Christopher Nolan, and they did what Christopher Nolan wants to do in terms of marketing for his movies.
Yeah.
But that's not what was driving much of the buzz around these movies. It was the grassroots social media campaign that people were, taking control of. That
it was
they
organic.
Were putting it into their own hands.
Yeah,
it was all organic.
Yeah.
And, because it was an event. And the reason we don't get that with Marvel or DC or whatever IP is because we get those movies so often every single year that, they're not really event driven. And really the only ones that were, we'd have to go back to Infinity War and Endgame, but that's because Marvel had done a great job of building up to that point.
But even so,
this event,
like, there was a point where Marvel movies, for a good chunk of time, were kind of events, at least, especially during Phase 2 and for most of Phase 3, I would say as well, especially leading up to Infinity War and Endgame, as you're saying. They did feel like events, and I think where the that sense of repetition is really starting to stem from is it's when a studio tries to replicate the event, right? And they try to mass produce the event. And
like
that's
Justice League, Batman versus Superman. Like, and that's because DC was in the catch-up game. So
Yeah, but
when
they were,
those
but
movies
they
came out,
they weren't just trying to recreate the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They were trying to recreate the movie going event, the spectacle that they were generating, not just
exactly
as
because
movies, but the hype.
Yeah, because to your point, the Avengers, that first one was absolutely an event in 2012.
Yeah,
And we had never seen anything like that up to that point.
right.
We've seen plenty of team up movies, but not in the way that Marvel did it with, we're introducing each character. We're kind of taking our time. This is a 4-year process.
Right.
And then we get to the Avengers. And yeah, so there was massive anticipation for that movie, that it was absolutely an event. And I would argue even some of the films, as you're talking about in phase 2 and 3, like Winter Soldier, I think was highly anticipated. People
Civil
were really
War
looking forward to
was,
Civil War,
yeah.
especially with the inclusion of Spider-Man. So,
Yeah.
Black
Black Panther was an event as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was 2018. So, there's certainly, recent history with Marvel has indicated that these films can still be events, but I think we're getting to the point now post Endgame that even though I like Phase 4 more so than a lot of others, I will concede to the point though that the market has become oversaturated, especially when you include everything that DC is trying to do, and we're just talking about Marvel and DC, but there's certainly a lot of other IPs that you could toss out there. You're talking about Disney and these live action remakes that they've been doing a lot of.
Yeah.
So
I've heard some people also say, and I'm not sure if I agree with this, but I think it might be more on the marketing or execution strategy around this. But we also have to consider the effects that Disney Plus has on this as well.
Streaming is certainly a big part of it.
Yeah. And it's because many of these properties that are feeling repetitive for audiences now that we're talking about, there are companion pieces for them on Disney Plus or some type of streaming service. And maybe the same could be said with regard to DC and how that relates to Max, right? So because of these interlocking platforms that share this IP space, that's, I think, maybe where the frustration is coming from with many moviegoers and just general audiences, and why they don't feel that sense of spectacle with them as much as they maybe liked back in the day.
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point, and the accessibility of it all has perhaps drained audiences of a lot of the hype and buzz that was there pre the streaming wars.
Yeah.
Because while we've been talking about Marvel here a little bit, I also think of Star Wars, like when The Force Awakens came out, The Last Jedi. Regardless of how you feel about those movies, those were absolutely
were events. Yeah, you cannot like the
huge.
movie, but you can't deny that they were events. Yeah,
absolutely,
exactly.
I mean, even Rise of Skywalker was, there was a lot of talk. There was a lot of what are they going to do after The Last Jedi? Are they going to retcon? Like there was still a lot of conversation, a lot of what if, and a lot of let's see what Disney and Lucasfilm does here. So it still was an event, even though it ended up being this gigantic mess. And that's because, and we've gotten more Star Wars content since then, but it wasn't oversaturated at that point. And now we're getting to the point where it is harder and harder to get up for a lot of the blockbuster IPs that we see these days, because it's once a month, it feels like we're just getting them a lot. So, when Tom Cruise comes around with Mission Impossible or Top Gun, like those are once every few years usually. Right. So those typically have that event feel. And Barbenheimer is almost its own animal, right? Because it's Christopher Nolan tackling a story that, and as much as I love Tom Cruise and Mission Impossible, that is a franchise.
That is,
and it's a character that we're familiar with, and a lot of what we've seen out of the last few films, they're upping the ante in terms of stakes, and like there's a lot of fun to be had with that franchise, but it is something we've seen before.
It is. It's an event that has been an event for some time. Barbenheimer is a new kind of event.
It's a new thing, right? Like we've never seen Barbie
Yeah.
in movie form like this. Oppenheimer, it's this story about, this grand event in U.S. history, and it's Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
It's got this extensive cast.
Yeah. But this kind of double feature, this organic
This double
marketing
feature
campaign.
on the same weekend. Yeah.
And it was, again, we talked about how organic that marketing campaign was, because it was basically created by the people. Like the studios had nothing to really do with that aside from just selecting the weekend that it fell on. But they certainly played into it.
Is noteworthy though, because Warner Brothers was being petty by putting Barbie up against Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
That is a part of this narrative.
That is a part of it, especially given Warner Brothers' history with Christopher Nolan as of late.
Exactly. And they're angry that he left and went to Universal. So they tried to sabotage him by putting Barbie up against Oppenheimer.
And that makes it so ironic. It makes it so ironic. Although at the same time, they're probably not really that mad about it, them being Warner Brothers, just given the results. And we'll get to the box office results in just a second.
Yeah.
But it's just the interesting thing about this, and I'm curious to see what ends up coming of it in the future, because we talked a lot about how these studios tried to replicate the event, right? With Marvel being an event at one point, other studios tried to play that same game, not necessarily the cinematic universe of it all, but just the hype of it all, right? With this, I really hope we don't see studios collaborate to create their own Barbenheimers, so to speak, right? Because I think that's just going to be more complicit of the same problem we're kind of seeing with all of these IPs in some ways. But what makes Barbenheimer so interesting is that it's one that the audience, from a marketing standpoint, was able to participate in. Yes. And that is so rare to see. Maybe we'll see studios actually allow that kind of participation more, which could be a very dangerous thing. I'm not saying that's something we should always advocate for, but in this case, it was this almost, like we keep saying, an organic coming together of sorts. And it was kind of beautiful, if I do say so myself.
It was really exciting, to be a part of and to see how it all to see how it unfolded in real time and to witness that. And another interesting point in all of that, and I believe you mentioned this, I'm trying to recall, it might have been the Barbie review episode that we just did. Is that it's not even just that we're getting these new and different films. We're getting a Barbie movie. We're getting an Oppenheimer movie. But it's from these auteurs that are really great directors and filmmakers. And this is the one thing that Marvel, DC, they really can't claim anything to this, right? Because those are superhero movies. Marvel has dipped their toes into with some director. They've partnered with some directors that are really great. I think of like Chloe Zhao, for example.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So they've been able to wrangle in some great filmmakers, but
they haven't really pushed them in that way, though. You know what I mean? Like the idea of getting a Chloe Zhao, who had just won Best Director at the time, I feel like there wasn't really as much of a push from Marvel to really sell that, right? Aside from maybe the trailer at one point saying from director Chloe Zhao or from Academy Award winner Chloe Zhao. There was really no marketing campaign around that.
Yes, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get into, because I am actually a defender of Marvel in that regard. Again, I'm not talking about quality, but Eternals, I think, has Chloe Zhao's thumbprint on it.
I like Eternals. Yeah, I think it's a
Say
really
what you will
interesting
about
movie.
the Thor films, but those are Taika Waititi's, films. They have his personality all over them, for better or worse.
Mostly
the
for worse, but
the first Thor film is very much a Kenneth Branagh movie, for example.
That's true.
So Joss Whedon, his sensibilities in that first Avengers and the second Avengers, that is very much there. And honestly, I think it's James Gunn with the Suicide Squad. Yeah, I mean, you cannot divorce those filmmakers from the DNA of the movies they are making. I think people going out of their way to criticize Marvel in that regard, I think, is a little a little myopic, and I think maybe a little, I want to criticize Marvel because I just don't like these
Yeah.
movies, and so I'm going all in regardless of what the
Yeah.
movies actually are. And so to me, that's a little misguided. So I want to be careful in here in the sense that I'm not diminishing Marvel by saying that,
Right.
that's not the case, because I do think though they let their filmmakers have at least some degree of input into how those movies ultimately come out, but they are not marketed that way for sure.
Right. Right.
Barbie was a Greta Gerwig movie. Oppenheimer, obviously Christopher Nolan is a big name, and a lot of the hype surrounding Barbie and Oppenheimer wasn't that it was a Barbie and Oppenheimer movie. That was way lower on the list of priorities. It was a Greta Gerwig movie. It was a Christopher Nolan movie. Like we're talking about these auteur filmmakers that we love, and they're doing these big movies that I think all of that combined is what makes it as huge as it was.
It makes for an interesting conversation. Which directors nowadays have that box office cachet, right? Like have that almost star power. Christopher Nolan has, ever since The Dark Knight. You could say it's directed by Christopher Nolan from The Dark Knight, and people are going to go see it, and people love his work because they always feel like events. But Steven Spielberg's always another great example of that. Like there are certain directors that carry that. And
Fincher, I think people go watch his movies because it's Fincher.
Yeah. Even if general moviegoers don't necessarily know the name, but if you say from the director of Fight Club and Seven and stuff like that,
they at least know his movies.
Yeah,
if they don't know his name.
That's the thing. Yeah, Nolan, I think people know his name, but there are certain filmmakers that they know the movies enough that maybe the name is almost secondary in that marketing campaign.
Jordan Peele is becoming that a thing.
He's becoming that. Ari Aster, I feel like, is starting to become that.
Yeah.
I don't think he's quite there yet, but I think he's got his cult following that's just getting bigger, and it might just keep expanding. But yeah, there are certain directors that are, they're carrying that box office number in some ways, and that's something we like to see, whether we like the directors or not. It's kind of fun to see people go to a movie because of who is writing it or directing it, who's behind the camera as opposed to in the camera, right? And it's always interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, all of that to say, I want more Barbenheimer event, experiences.
Yeah.
I think that would be really fun. And I just don't know if there's a world where that's possible, because the studios are going to cling to these IPs regardless of the consequences.
Well, I mean, I think the studios are going to learn something from this. I don't know. Well, let me finish. I didn't say they're going to learn something good from this. I said they're going to learn something from this. You could be taught the wrong lesson.
You're definitely right about that. Yeah.
Well, that's why I said earlier, I wouldn't be surprised if studios try to replicate the Barbenheimer hype.
They're going to try. Yes,
they're going to, but it's going to be so superficial. And I think because people didn't participate in it like they did with Barbenheimer, and it doesn't feel as organic as that was, you're going to notice the obvious like catch up that these studios are doing if they were to play that same game.
And that's going to be an interesting game of poker, though, right? Because we're talking about Warner Brothers and Universal here.
Yeah.
And while this was organic, it somewhat began with a petty thing from Warner Brothers wanting to go after Nolan here. We're talking about, like, if they're going to manufacture this in the future, we're talking about two rival studios coming together to be like, hey, I have this movie. What do you have? Let's put them on the same date and see if we can do this. And to me, that's an interesting game of chicken that could easily backfire on one studio over the other, which from a political behind the scenes Hollywood drama perspective could be honestly really fun to see how that goes. You know, but from a financial perspective, from an artistic perspective, I don't even know what that would mean necessarily either.
Oh yeah, will directors be held to a certain or will they have their hands tied behind their back like some directors for certain IPs just to replicate the same event?
That's my fear. Yeah, that's exactly it. And the thing is, you can't hand tie Greta Gerwig and Christopher Nolan.
You cannot. No.
Those films were great. That's the thing about Barbenheimer that is exciting, because we had built this up in our minds. This was going to be the weekend of all weekends regarding cinema in 2023. What if both movies came out and they were like, okay, or not?
Well,
great?
that would have been, if they were terrible, I think that would have been more interesting, because then people would have been more curious about them. At least
Well,
I would be. But you're right. If
I
they
don't
were
think
just,
it would have gone great.
well, I mean, it wouldn't have been as good as it was. But I think if they were both merely okay, you find less of a need to spread that word of mouth. You're more likely to spread the word of mouth of something that's terrible as opposed to right?
Well, the box office would have been very different. They
would have been
would
very
not have
different.
made these numbers if the quality of those movies were, middle of the road.
The point is that we had all this hype for just the marketability of what Barbenheimer was and as an event, and both films actually deliver, not just
And they were
something
great.
good. Yeah, most people think that they were like we're probably going to see both of them come up on a lot of critics' top 10 lists by the end of the year. Like that's what we're talking about with these two movies, and that's so astounding when the hype was already that big, and then the hype just continues to grow when critics got the chance to see it earlier.
And that is probably where, in all reality, where studios take the wrong lesson from this. And I can't help but think of something like the Flash, right? Because how often did we hear executives at Warner Brothers go, "This is a game changer. This is going to be the best superhero movie of all time. We are sitting on a gold mine." It goes on to lose $200 million. It's the biggest loss in Warner Brothers history. And so I think
Box office
about
disaster. Now where's Batgirl? I want to see Batgirl now.
Well, I know, right? But I think about that when we're talking about studios wanting to manufacture this in the future, because that means that they have to pick out these films that they think are great.
Yeah.
Well, their track record in terms of artistic prowess is not good. It's not good at all. And especially if they're hand tying behind the scenes, as you're suggesting, which is certainly possible. That to me is where that will absolutely fall apart, because they're going to try to manufacture this. They're going to pick a film that they think is great, but it's probably not, and we can generate buzz. Like all the grassroots campaign, that might be something that you can replicate, especially if you have a fascinating filmmaker that people are attaching themselves to, that they love, and the project is at least alluring on some level that people are going to be interested to go see it. But if the execution and the quality isn't there, if Barbie and Oppenheimer were not what they were, the overall response would be just deflation, because you are on such a high that anything less than excellent, people will feel deflated. The word of mouth, it'll just be like popping a balloon, and everything will dissipate. There'll be no conversation. The word of mouth will be gone, and all of a sudden those box office numbers that were so great for Barbie and Oppenheimer would be half of what they did, and then it becomes a massive failure, and that's likely what's going to happen.
This is where
try to manufacture this.
This is where I would at least try to be a little bit hopeful, and think that if there is a right lesson to be learned from this, that I think is still possible for studios to recognize if they think about this intelligently. It goes back to something you said a few weeks ago, talking about just the nature of movie going now, the box office experience, IPs, and what we see all these within all these movies now. Just make good movies.
Make good movies. Make good
because
movies.
let's look at these past few years and the movies that have come the closest to being events. Right? Obviously, we have Barbie and Oppenheimer. Last year we had Top Gun Maverick. I guess we can kind of lump Avatar: The Way of Water in that as well.
That was an event. For sure.
Yeah.
And it was great.
Well, there you go. What's the commonality with all these movies is that most people thought they were very good. So, I mean, is it not that obvious? I mean, it's like you would think that it's that easy, right?
You would think so. I think the formula is there. And I do think everything we talked about a few weeks ago in terms of where we are right now in a post-pandemic world is very applicable to this weekend as well. And people are starving for great content. And while streaming is not going away anytime soon, I think this weekend absolutely proved that people will go to the cinema. They
Yeah.
are starving for these kinds of movies.
Yeah.
But they need to be events, because Barbenheimer is going to happen once this year. This is the only time you can see these movies with the hype being at its peak. And people wanted to participate in that.
Mm-hmm.
And and you can't like that won't happen if you're trying to recreate a Barbenheimer every few months. It's just not going to happen.
That and we talked about this being an organic grassroots marketing campaign that the audience was able to participate in, which is what made them so excited about it. But the difference is, and this is where I can see it going so wrong, is that the studios didn't ask people to participate in it. It just sort of happened. It's not like it's not like Warner Brothers or even Universal went to a bunch of TikTokers and said, find a way to push our movies. And it created this movement, which could, backfire if they were going that direction. Like somehow it engaged people in the right way, that I feel like this movement is going to be studied in marketing classes in the future. Just trying to understand, the strategic birth of what caused it, and where it stemmed from, and like who even deserves credit for it. I mean, like I don't even know who we can actually credit for this. It's so ingenious with how it all maneuvered around.
Yeah, and I think maybe a remedy here, aside from the obvious of make good movies, higher quality talent that you can market, but I think if you do less of the bigger stuff, so I know I might as well be talking to the wall here because these studio execs are not going to listen to this at all. But you do less of the bigger IP stuff that people are feeling tired of, and you throw in some more of the mid-budget adult dramas that I think people can only see in streaming, but they might be interested in seeing these movies in theaters as well.
Yeah.
You do a little bit more of those, and you take that $250 million budget that you somehow threw at Thor: Love and Thunder.
Yeah.
And so you take, the money that you would have saved by removing that, because we're doing less IP movies, we can just take our handful of blockbusters like it was 20 years ago, where you only got a handful of them, and we market the hell out of them as these events.
Yeah.
And we hire the right directors behind them, perhaps some auteurs, and you get a great cast like we saw with Barbie and Oppenheimer as well.
Yep.
And you just market the hell out of it and make it what it was, because Barbenheimer, to your point on the Barbie review episode, it did feel like it was 2004 again.
Yeah, it did.
And that was exciting. I honestly, I think that's why people responded the way they did. Now, the only difference is we have social media now that can amplify our excitement, where Twitter didn't exist in 2004.
And yet social media is helping to amplify the things that we were going to the movies for in the first place back in the day. Right.
I mean, and that's the thing. Like like Barbie was incredibly intelligent in using their marketing money to create evocative things that they knew people would get excited for and would spread that like wildfire on Twitter. And that's what they did. And that's all they needed to do.
Yep.
And people like took ownership in that. And the fans of Barbie that were excited, Greta Gerwig fans, me being among them, a lot of cinephiles,
Same.
would take that stuff, they'd throw that out there incessantly, that the marketing team for Warner Brothers didn't really have to do all that much, except spend a little money on some evocative imagery.
We were responding to the literal human souls that made these movies, which is my way of saying this is why the strikes need to end as quickly as possible, to really acknowledge the talent that makes these kind of movies happen.
Pay your artists.
Right?
I like that.
AI cannot do this.
They cannot.
AI will not be able to replicate a Barbenheimer.
They're absolutely not. And I don't even want to think about the nightmares that would come if they asked an AI to replicate Barbie visually, narratively. Like, I don't even want to know what that would look like.
God,
Because we know
I may
it
have
would be
gagged a
nightmarish.
little bit just thinking about that.
Like-
oh my gosh.
Like, you need human writers and directors and craftsmen and performers to make those movies what they are.
Yeah.
And yeah, pay your workers. That's the incredible irony of all of this. Warner Brothers and Universal had this incredible success that might not mean anything if this strike lingers for months at a time.
I know.
Because you go 11, 12 months in 2025, what is there going to be at the cinemas? There's going to be no movies.
No. I mean, especially with some of these big movies that we want to see, like Dune Part 2, which might be delayed until what I think I saw like March to June of 2024 now, because there's no way to even promote the final product anymore.
Well, and maybe even next year as well, or later on this year, because they can't even promote these movies. So if this goes on for another 11, 12 months,
well, then,
what
then
are we going to get next year even? Because a lot of things might be delayed to 2025.
Will we still see some of these big Oscar contenders, like let's say Killers of the Flower Moon, Martin Scorsese's latest film? At this point now, do we just award Best Picture to Barbenheimer? And I mean literally both movies. Award Best Picture to the movement that, basically ended the cinematic year of 2023.
Yeah. I mean, my guess is if things get pretty bare in the back half of the year, that the Academy will just pull the plug on the Oscars for this year. That would be my best guess, but we'd have to perhaps bring in a Ryan McQuaid or an Eric Anderson or a Matt Neglia to answer that question.
Yeah.
But it could get really fascinating with what the next 10, 11, 12 months could be if they don't reach a deal and get these artists back to work. And, and it's ironic. You come off the heels of the biggest success that you've seen in quite some time. And you're like, we don't need these guys. We'll just ride into the desert on a high note. Like
the sheer hypocrisy of that, the tragic irony of that is just ridiculous.
It's
ridiculous.
Let's talk about these box office numbers.
Yeah.
So Barbie, let's start there. Grossed $180 million domestically over the week. I think to date it's $188 million domestically.
Yeah, and I think you're incorporating like Tuesday's numbers, today's numbers into that as well. Are you, or is that just the end?
Well,
is that
I'm
just
looking
Monday?
at it as of right now.
Okay, got good.
Yeah, the opening. Yeah, to be clear, because I do have the numbers here. The opening was 162. To right now, as of today, and as I noted at the top of the show, it's July 25th. It is $188 million, which is insane. Worldwide, $382 million.
382. And what was the budget? The budget for Barbie was 100 million, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe that is the case. Let me, while we're talking here, let me just go ahead and...
Well, I believe it is because I saw someone tweet how the cost of both Barbie and Oppenheimer was less than the cost of Thor: Love and Thunder.
So what I'm reading here is 128 million. I don't know if that's accurate, but it's ish in the ballpark.
Well, put it this way. Is it a cheap movie? Not necessarily, but it's way cheaper than many of these other movies that we've complained look like crap nowadays.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Like, people were talking about Thor: Love and Thunder being, more than Barbie and Oppenheimer combined, and that film looks not great comparatively to Barbie and Oppenheimer. But let's just say that the budget was $130 million.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of argument. Yeah. It's doubled its budget in a few days.
Yeah. Which is a great thing to have.
And of course there's marketing costs there, and we don't know exactly what the marketing costs were. But it's going to break that because this film is not slowing down. So 382 is where it's at right now worldwide.
Yeah.
In the next few weeks, where could that be?
That's the
600
thing.
million,
That's
maybe?
the thing. Yeah, because a movie needs to make what percentage of its budget in order to actually break even? Doesn't it need to be like at least 3 times the amount in order to actually be considered a break even point? Again, correct me if I'm wrong for any listeners out there, but it's somewhere around that. It can't just make its budget back or even twice its budget. It's got to be a certain like level above that to cover those additional expenses and marketing
Well,
costs like you're talking about.
yeah.
But the point that you're saying, and I agree, I mean, this movie's only been open to the public for what,
Like
5
5
days
days?
as we're recording
Yeah.
this. So we have a whole theatrical run to get through, unless, Warner Brothers says, hey, in 2 weeks, we're putting this on Max.
Well, that's where things get real tricky. I don't think that's going to happen. With
I don't
the
think
amount
so
of
either.
money
No,
this movie's
that would be
making, but
that would be beyond silly.
But look, Warner Brothers executives have demonstrated on multiple occasions that they are not the smartest guys in the room. So if they were to decide next weekend to put that film on Max, look, I won't be surprised. As dumb as that would be, as unrealistic as that probably is, nothing would shock me at this point. I'm just saying.
I would be a little bit shocked, but the fact that I would only be a little bit shocked, I still think goes to show the idiocy that you're referring to. Like we should all be jaws on the floor if they were to do something like that.
I agree.
But I think I'll just be minorly mouth agape. Is basically if I saw something like that happen.
Yeah. At any rate, in 5 days, it's done $382 million worldwide.
Yep.
$1 billion. I don't think is out of the reach.
I don't think it's out of the
Barbie.
question. No, I think this is potentially $1 billion movie just based on the trajectory we're seeing this early.
Yeah. For Oppenheimer, now this I did look up was $100 million.
Okay.
Domestically, its opening was $82 million.
Yeah.
Not too shabby for an R-rated movie.
A 3-hour biographical
R-rated
R-rated movie. And you're
about
talking domestically.
Robert.
That's not even
Domestically.
worldwide.
Yeah, and to date, domestic is 95 million, so it's creeping up there on 100 million.
Mm-hmm.
Worldwide, $209 million for Oppenheimer.
Yep. And I think the exciting thing too about this is, and I saw this statistic, I think courtesy of IndieWire, and I don't know how true that it is. I saw someone just tweet this, so you can't really believe everything you see on Twitter nowadays if there's no source to really back it up. But apparently there's a statistic out there that says only 6% of people who saw Oppenheimer only saw it because they couldn't see Barbie. Which means, I mean, at least the way I take that, that's a pretty small number. So that means there's a lot of organic desire to see Oppenheimer as well. Yeah. Which, again, I think we could assume that, but that's still an interesting statistic to lump in there.
Well, I think what's really fascinating to me about that is that it's indicative of a thirst to go to the cinema.
Yeah.
That even if I can't see the movie that I really want to see, well, I'll go see this instead because I really want to go.
Yeah.
That to me is incredible. Like, I love that. And to me, that just echoes so hard what we were talking about earlier, that if you make good movies with filmmakers that people love, with cast and artistry behind them, they will want to go to the theater. They want to go.
That's the thing. That's where like the whole sports thing is kind of futile with regard to film. Sometimes that competitive spirit when it comes to box office results is kind of a good thing, right? Like it shouldn't just be one movie that dominates the box office every weekend. I mean, the idea that you have a choice, and this, like we talked about choice being such a big thing with streamers back in the day. That's why audiences loved Netflix and the growth of Hulu and Amazon Prime at the time, because it gave audiences control. But the fact that you go to the movies and you have options, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea, you like 2 clear options, but even so, what if you didn't see Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning yet? You have options to go to the movies, and you're not just going to see the new IP movie that everyone's going to see that weekend.
Yeah.
That's the neat thing about it that takes me back to going to the movies as a kid, is sometimes you just show up at the theater, point at the screen and say, that looks interesting, but that also looks interesting. And that's kind of what happened here.
Absolutely. And I'm really curious what these numbers are going to look or look like in another week's time, because this weekend the major release is Disney's Haunted Mansion.
I'm
And I
not
think
seeing that.
There's a horror film, Talk to Me.
I heard that's
wanna
pretty
say.
good. Yeah, I'm curious about that. I don't really anticipate that being,
Yeah, that
Barbenheimer levels of
No, that
excitement.
won't make that much of a dent. Haunted Mansion, I don't think will be a great movie, but it is a Disney film that is derived off of one of their rides at Magic Kingdom, and people love that ride. I could see it doing okay, like having an okay opening, like, I don't know, $50-60 million opening.
I mean,
we'll say.
I think Barbie is going to be number one at the box office next weekend again.
I agree. Well, and that's ultimately my point, is that in essence, what I'm trying to say is there's not much coming out this week.
Barbenheimer doesn't have much competition.
It doesn't have much competition. It will likely have another stellar weekend where, to your point, if you have to triple your budget to make your money back, I mean, Oppenheimer at the very least will do that by Sunday night.
Probably, yeah.
And at the rate Barbie's going, it's probably not too far behind. And they're well on their way to crushing even those numbers. I mean, because the week after, when we get to August 4th, we have the animated film Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which, it's an animated film, a property that kids are aware of, that could do okay. I'm curious on that one. But the only other film that it has to compete with is Meg 2. I don't know how much Meg 2 is going to take away from Barbenheimer, although that would be the third weekend at that point. But I don't know. Like,
I don't know either. Yeah, I could see the same thing happening that we sort of saw with Top Gun Maverick, right? The success of that movie wasn't just the fact that it was good. It's the fact that people went to see it multiple times. And I think that's going to happen with, at the very least for Barbie. It's hard to really make that happen with a 3-hour biographical drama, right? And that's really just due to time commitments. But I wouldn't be surprised if people are seeing Oppenheimer more than once, just given the positive response that it's gotten from not just critics but also audiences. And I wouldn't even be surprised by the time that August 4th, as you said, rolls around, people are still going to see Barbie again. I would not be surprised.
I agree. You get to August 11th, it's Gran Turismo. I mean, it's not until August 18th when Blue Beetle comes out, which hasn't, the marketing really hasn't been there for that movie, but it is a DC movie. So I would say that would be, that's the first true test or roadblock that Barbenheimer will come against over the next few weeks.
I hear it's projecting pretty low right now. Blue Beetle is, but maybe
they can market it, but the cast can't do anything to promote it.
Right.
Which does not help at all.
That's changing the formula a lot right now.
Yeah. So the strike is certainly going to hurt a lot of these films over the next few months, because the cast can't go and promote them. So that could be another thing that just props up Barbenheimer, as sad as that is. Like, that's kind of a heartbreaking reason, because I don't want these films, I'm not looking forward necessarily to, I don't know, Meg 2 could be fun, but Gran Turismo, Blue Beetle, I'm not necessarily, I'm not dying to see these movies, but I don't want to see them fail, especially because of the strike.
That's kind of the double-edged sword with this, right? Because we want Barbenheimer to keep succeeding, but we don't necessarily want these movies to fail in order for it to succeed. If we want Barbenheimer to succeed, we want it to keep organically succeeding in the right way, while these other movies, even if they don't stand a chance, they still hold their own and can make their money back. That's that's a best case scenario, a best of both worlds option that we're at least hoping for.
Which is hard to do right now, right?
Because
the cast can't, their hands are tied. They're on strike. They can't go and promote these movies. So
yeah, seriously, these studios watching this happen now, it's imagine if they weren't able to promote a Barbenheimer event. What if Barbenheimer was coming out in October or something like that, but we still had this organic grassroots marketing campaign to really cue us in that this could be a big deal, but we can't promote it properly. In addition to that, that's a scary thought, because that would severely affect the the impact that it had that we just saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The next few months will be very, very interesting. I do want to move on though, because we talked a lot about Barbenheimer and box office.
I knew we were going to have a lot to
means.
talk about this. Yeah.
Brendan, let's talk about Scream 6 specifically.
Yeah, or I guess it's how will we pronounce this one? Because they very cleverly incorporated the 6, the Roman numeral 6 within the M. So I guess it's like Screamix.
Screamix. Yeah.
I mean, obviously sure. Talking about you know me, I always try to like Scroforum, I always call it that. But anyway, Scream 6. Good movie. We like it a lot more than Scream 5 for sure.
Yes, I really enjoyed it quite a lot. And it is now available on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
And it turns out we have 5 of them to give away. We got 5 of them. It should be 6 for Scream 6.
It should be 6,
but they only gave us 5.
Yeah. Not quite thematically appropriate, but we still have 5 physical Blu-rays to give away. And we know that there are a lot of fans out there.
I will talk Brendan into buying an extra one, and he will send out a 6th one.
Okay. That's fine. That satisfies my OCD tendencies to want to turn it into 6 copies because it is Scream 6. So fine. I'll run to Barnes & Noble or something. I got to pick out some new Criterion movies anyway, so I'll buy.
Right, so Brendan will get a 6th one, and we'll give out 6 of these suckers because that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
But we have some Blu-rays to give away.
Yep.
And if you want one, you will have an opportunity to. All you have to do is follow us on Twitter X, whatever it's called, Blue Sky maybe, or a little Threads action, Instagram, whatever the case may be.
Yep.
But we'll put out a post. All you have to do is engage with it, and we'll put out the instructions there on social media, and you will be entered into winning one of these Blu-rays for Scream 6'em, or whatever we're calling it.
Scream 6'em, I like it.
Yeah, but good movie, and it's one you want to own. And what better way of owning the film than to winning it on Blu-ray for free?
Absolutely,
so
absolutely.
Follow us on social media, send out a good scream, and who knows, maybe the universe will hear it, and it'll come into the energy will come over here when we are picking out names randomly. So
hey, that energy exists. Yeah, don't make fun of it. Yeah, that it helps. It helps. Yeah,
it definitely does. So send out
it's like the Force, right?
Exactly. So send out your biggest scream, and we'll pick out those winners. So again, follow us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, all of it.
Yep.
For your chance to win a free Blu-ray for Scream 6. The InSession Film Podcast is brought to you by our great friends over at First Time Watchers. And Brendan, we're talking about Barbenheimer, the box office, where things are going to go next. What's heartbreaking about First Time Watchers is we know exactly where it's going next, and it's going
nowhere.
It's going nowhere. It's going away. But we love them.
We do.
They're a great show, and before it ends, you need to go check these guys out.
Absolutely. They've been releasing so much great content over the years. They've been essentially a partner with us for all of this time, for the past 10 years, really. A great supporter of our show. We've been supporting them as well, and we were honored to support them because they are a great podcast and one you have to check out. Hosted by Tim, Walter, and Hermano. Not only do they know their movies, but I'm almost tempted to see if I can come up with some combination of their 3 names like we do Barbenheimer. Hermano Turtim. I can't do it. I can't do it.
Man, I should have thought about that beforehand. I'm sure there's one out there that exists.
There's one out there. Let us know, everyone listening. How do we combine these names to create the First Time Watchers version of Barbenheimer?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's a great show. On their latest episode, they talked about Throne of Blood, the Kurosawa classic there. And I want to say that's a film that, because we did a Kurosawa series some time ago, but I don't think that one was part of it.
It was not part of it, no. And honestly, Kurosawa is a director I really want to revisit. I mean, not necessarily his entire filmography because it's so big and it's and extensive, but
Yeah.
some of his major hits, if you want to call them that, I think Throne of Blood might be my second favorite Kurosawa film. I mean,
Oh,
it
and
is.
we didn't even talk about it.
I know it is intense. That is a diabolical movie, and I love it, absolutely love it. And I think they had a great conversation talking about it.
Yeah, the conversation was really fantastic. Definitely urge people to go and check that out. So
Yeah, absolutely. And their banter is really great there too. And what's really unique is that, you know, they pick out movies they've never seen, whether they be classic like this or some obscure film. This is what I'm going to miss about the first time watchers, right, JD? It's the picking of some obscure, random, surprising film that they choose to talk about, because it's something that no film podcast is really doing nowadays, or at least not many of them. And really owning up to it. It's all about what's commercial, what's new, what's topical, right? But these guys would pick some random 80s horror. They talked about Critters not too long ago. I mean, that's what you're getting into with the first time watchers, which really gives their show a fresh perspective with regard to what film criticism in podcast form can ultimately be nowadays. Really great stuff, and they'll also discuss other movies that they've caught up with, and maybe some movie trailers that are worth noting too.
yeah, they give out some great recommendations at the end of their show that I would urge you to pay attention to. And overall, the show is very smart. It's incisive. It's funny. It's weird. It's all of the above. God, we're going to miss them. Brendan, where can you find them on the internet?
You can check them out at firsttimewatchers.podbean.com, spelled out FIRST, timewatchers.podbean.com. Also hit them up on Twitter at First Time Watchers, Instagram, and Facebook by simply searching First Time Watchers.
And go subscribe to them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And while you are there, please leave them a review. Let them know how much you love their show. At the end of your review, we ask that you leave a little hashtag so they know we sent it to them. And this week's hashtag could be the combined name, if we could think of one.
If someone can think of one, yeah, or just say like you're gonna create a throne of blood by killing them all if they decide to end their show like they're doing. Like we've got to keep this show going. I'm so sad that they're exiting. I know. I really am.
Here's off the cuff my best my best one here. Waltimano.
That sounds like an actual name.
Waltimano. That's all I got.
Waltimano.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're saying like Walton Auto or something like that.
Waltimano. That's all I got. Waltimano.
I don't think you're going to get better than that.
Yeah. That's my best one. So you can leave that hashtag or maybe something else, Throne of FTW, just have fun with it.
Waltimano. I'm still thinking about that. I might start a band and call it that.
Well, yeah. So anyway, leave them that hashtag, leave them that review. Go check them out. We promise you'll love them. Again, that's First Time Watchers. Let's talk about our updated rankings from last week. So as I talked about up at the top of the show, we did a combined ranking of Greta Gerwig and Christopher Nolan.
Right.
And here's what we came down. And again, this is a consensus ranking. This is Brendan and I talking through it and coming to a consensus ranking of the combined films of Nolan and Greta Gerwig. And number 1 was Little Women. Number 2 was Dunkirk. Number 3, Lady Bird. So I do love that Gerwig took 2 of the top 3.
Yeah, I know, right?
Love that. 4 was Inception. 5 was Memento. Then The Dark Knight, followed by Batman Begins, The Prestige, Tenet, Interstellar, Gerwig's co-directed film Nights and Weekends. Then following Insomnia, and in last place was Dark Knight Rises.
Yep.
So that was the ranking we came up with last week pre-Barbenheimer. Now, with that list in mind, Brendan, Barbie and Oppenheimer, where do we put these two movies?
I mean, if we put in just Barbenheimer as one option, it's number 1, right?
Yeah, sure.
This is difficult because at least one, actually no, not even these, at least one. Both of these movies I need to marinate on for a while, and I could easily see where we rank these now. I could see it changing in a matter of weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I said this during our Barbie review, and it still holds true since we recorded that just one day ago. I'm liking Barbie more as time goes on, and I really enjoyed it at the time. Like for, I guess, letterbox ranking comparisons, when I first walked out of the theater of Barbie, I was thinking like a 3.5 out of 5, but now I'm easily thinking a 4 out of 5.
Nice. Yeah.
With Oppenheimer, I'm having a similar reaction. I'm liking it more as time goes on, and that one I already gave like a 4.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So,
yeah.
which is to say, like, if I'm a betting man and I'm trying to see where I think this list would be, or at least where my list would be in, like, I don't know, let's say December of this year, right? I think Oppenheimer is going to be number 1 for me. Like, I could see it doing that. I don't want to make that promise yet, so I'm not going to do that yet. I think at this point, I would go. So, Little Women, I still want to keep at number 1. Dunkirk, I'll still keep at number 2. And I'm looking at the consensus ranking here.
Yes.
I might be hard pressed to put Oppenheimer at number 3.
I think that's where I'm with you. Honestly.
You are? Okay.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Wow.
Because, and that's, to your point, something that could very well change in the coming weeks. As it sits right now, I think I'm slightly, like, by a hair higher on Dunkirk than Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
But they're both excellent. They're both top tier Nolan. I love them both. And there really is, I can't sit here and critique one to praise another, because I think they're both masterpieces.
Yeah.
Like, I think they're both great. There's something about the elegance and the poetry of Dunkirk, and it's so antithetical to, like, the brooding, horroring war films that we've come to know with that genre. And those films are great. I'm not taking away from that at all, but Dunkirk is so different for that genre. And it's also interesting in the context of Nolan's career, because it's the dark and brooding tone that he brought to the superhero genre that has now been prominent since then, with, the Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's something about Dunkirk and just the time of it all, and just the incredible cleverness behind that film. And I can't shake its elegance.
Yeah.
And so that is not to diminish Oppenheimer at all. I think I'm just a hair higher on Dunkirk. So I would put Oppenheimer at 3 for right now.
I'm with you. So I guess for context, which is interesting, I don't want to contradict myself here, because I just ranked Oppenheimer at number 3 in our consensus rankings, which means I have it above Memento. But I still think Memento is my favorite Nolan film. There's this battle you have to, sort of separate yourself from with regard to consensus rankings as opposed to your own rankings.
Exactly.
Because right now my top 3 Nolan in order might be Memento, Dunkirk, and Oppenheimer. But I can see that changing. But I think in the context of how we're trying to structure the works of these two filmmakers, I feel like placing Oppenheimer at number 3 there is pretty apt. It just seems to make sense to me.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. And I guess just for the record, and maybe we can get into our personal Nolan rankings here at the end of this, but because my 3 right now, I think, would be Dunkirk, Oppenheimer, Inception.
Okay.
Memento.
Number 4 for you?
Right after that, yeah.
Gotcha. So then I guess Barbie is the next one we have to place in here, right?
Yeah. And this is tricky, because I love Little Women and Lady Bird so much. So much. To reiterate, they were my favorite films of their respective years. I don't know, and this is a silly, I guess, way to phrase this, because even if Barbie isn't my favorite film of this year, that doesn't mean that it's lesser than those movies.
Sure.
However, gun to my head, I think it still is number 3 for me.
It's number 3 for me as well. Of the 3 solo films
yes.
from
and
Greta
I love
Gerwig.
Barbie. Don't get me wrong, I love it. But I love Lady Bird and Little Women so much. So like maybe after Memento, like above The Dark Knight.
Ooh, let's piss off a lot of people if we do that.
I mean, I love The Dark Knight. It's great, but so is Barbie.
The thing is that I would be willing to put it above The Dark Knight once for context, we ranked The Dark Knight where we did above certain films, but also below others. There was this balance of personal ranking with the cultural impact that these films had, right?
Yes.
I do feel like we need to keep Barbie underneath The Dark Knight until we've had time to really see the cultural impact it's going to have.
Brandon,
now
we just had an hour conversation about its cultural impact before it even came out.
But we also had what 15 years of The Dark Knight to relish in that cultural, and we still talk about The Dark Knight as perhaps the greatest superhero movie ever made. And a lot of that is due to circumstance, right? Due to association, because we still see so many superhero movies that we're always forced to compare it to The Dark Knight. Yes. So it's not really the cultural impact of The Dark Knight. It's more so its relation to the repetitiveness that, or the repetition that is superhero movies. So I don't know. I mean, I like The Dark Knight more than Barbie at this point. So I mean, I still kind of like Batman Begins a little bit more. I have a soft spot for that movie. I don't know. I'm torn on this one. I know it's in the middle. I know Barbie is somewhere in the middle of all of these movies between Nolan and Gerwig. I'm just not sure where I want to put it.
I am very confident in that Memento Dark Knight range. That's where I'm at.
Okay.
I'm certainly not below that at all. And
yeah,
you make a great point, but if in that case, I think we could say the same thing about Oppenheimer, which has, because of the two, I would say Barbie probably was more of a driving force of that cultural phenomenon.
Oh, I
over
agree.
The last year or so than Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, I just feel like is a flawless movie and one of Nolan's best.
Yeah,
so,
it was.
like,
it's kind of along for the ride for sure. But yeah, I think we're mostly ranking that one so high because it is so well crafted.
Yeah, it's great. But so like that again, that's where it's a double-edged sword, and I don't know if I can just wholly rely on cultural significance as as its weight in terms of these rankings, because in terms of craft, I don't think it's any lesser than a lot of these other movies.
Fair.
I think it just kind of comes down to, and these are very impossible films to compare, but like, do you prefer The Dark Knight or Barbie? And I don't know, like, again, gun to my head, I might choose Barbie over The Dark Knight. I don't know.
I think I still do prefer The Dark Knight. I'm kind of coming at this at different angles. Like I said, I do prefer Batman Begins at this point over The Dark Knight as well as Barbie, but I kind of feel like I want to put Barbie above Batman Begins primarily because of the Barbenheimer effect and just what it represented. And it's so top of mind. Part of me wants to rank it below The Dark Knight as well because I don't want to piss off a lot of fans. Part of me wants to rank it above The Dark Knight because I do want to piss off a lot of fans. Right now I'm feeling below The Dark Knight, but I could be swayed if you're feeling a little differently there.
I am above The Dark Knight. That's like below Memento, above The Dark Knight. That's where I'm at. So
interesting.
There's only two of us here, so the only way to settle this is to flip a coin. So I am going to do that right now.
You have a coin. I love it.
I have a digital coin.
I was gonna say, like no one carries quarters anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we have someone around this house somewhere, but I'm gonna flip this digital coin.
I love the appropriateness of a coin flip, given that one of these movies features Harvey Two-Face.
Exactly. Again, thematically on the nose here.
Yeah, I love it.
All right. So with that in mind, heads for Barbie.
Okay.
Tails for The Dark Knight.
All right.
And here we go. I'm going to press the button right now. It is flipping. It is flipping. It is flipping. And it is heads.
All right. Barbie it is. Barbie goes at number 7.
There it is. Here, I'm going to take a screenshot of this in case someone comes at me and goes, "You made that up, bro." Here it is. It's right here. I'm not making it up. I pressed the button. That's what it was.
All right, post it on social media so we know that it happened.
It's right there. Got the screenshot. So all right, there it came down to a coin toss.
All right. So let's reiterate this collective ranking of Barbenheimer, really, of Gerwig and Nolan once again. At number 1, Little Women. At number 2, Dunkirk. Number 3, Oppenheimer. Number 4, Lady Bird. Number 5, Inception. Number 6, Memento. Number 7, Barbie. Number 8, The Dark Knight. Number 9, Batman Begins. At number 10, The Prestige. At number 11, Tenet. Number 12, Interstellar. Number 13, Nights and Weekends. Following at number 14, Insomnia at number 15. And dead last, The Dark Knight does not rise.
No, it does not. All right. That was a lot of fun.
That was. What a wild filmography if this came from one person.
I know, right? Could you imagine? Wait, this guy did The Dark Knight and a Barbie movie? That's so strange.
If someone actually did do that and succeeded, I would shake their hand.
I know. Now I want to see Nolan do the sequel to Barbie.
What if that happened? That would be amazing if they just swapped roles for a moment. And then Gerwig made a Nolan-esque movie or something.
Yeah. Look, it's anything is possible.
Or
I think,
what if we did a pseudo sequel to Oppenheimer, but from Kitty's perspective, and it's a Greta Gerwig film?
There you go. Like, what was it? Someone on Twitter did this. I'm trying to think here off the cuff. Who was it? Was it Nicole Ackman? I want to say it was, because she said something about how like this is for Barbie. Like the next Barbie movie should be about Ken and kind of delving into his story a little bit more now that he's having to find his identity away from Barbie, but it's directed by Baumbach and written by Baumbach and Gerwig. So you get
that's
the
brilliant.
Perspective
That's
and the
brilliant.
direction.
And we talked about that, how the script, just the writing credits alone, were almost symbolic for that movie, right? The two perspectives kind of battling each other, and now we have that once again working in a very literal way. That's if that was Nicole Ackman who said that.
Yeah,
that is Nicole. Genius. Yeah. We got to give her credit for that one. If that's the case.
mean, I read that, I was like, oh my god, like that is incredible. That's exactly what should happen.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine a Ken movie in the style of The Squid and the Whale?
Exactly. I want this so much right now.
Oh my gosh.
All right, let's end the show here. We're going to look back 10 years at Pacific Rim, directed by Guillermo del Toro. And this is a film that did not do all that great. It did not have a Barbenheimer type exit from the box office.
Yeah.
It ended up getting a sequel later on, but del Toro was very much removed from it, and Charlie Hunnam wasn't a part of it. Like, just it was a very different cast.
I sometimes forget that movie exists.
I know, I do too.
John Boyega was in it, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. I mean, this was like right off the heels of The Force Awakens, I think. So he was a big draw.
I think I remember we reviewed it together, and you were pretty you defended it pretty strongly at that time, but I mean, not strongly. You weren't like passionate about it.
I liked it more than you. I did not love it. I thought it was okay.
Okay.
I mean, it certainly was a far cry from del Toro's movie, which I genuinely love. I think this movie is really great. And I do think that it's been reappraised a little bit over the last 10 years. It was really fun actually seeing a lot of comments and tweets and social media comments about the film as it celebrated its 10th anniversary, and people were talking about what they loved about it. And there was a lot more praise. It was very different than what it was in 2013, and there was something about the celebration of Pacific Rim all these years later that, made me giddy. Like it turned me into, like my 7-year-old son, like I was just having a lot of fun with it. So, and that was a movie that, at the time I was very much anticipating.
Mhm.
And that was a year where Iron Man 3 was coming out and Man of Steel
Yeah.
come out, and those two films recently celebrated 10 years as well. Back in May, I believe those films did. But even more so than those movies, I might have been looking forward to Pacific Rim the most in terms of summer fare. And maybe it's because it's Del Toro and I just love his brain and
Yeah.
love his vision for monsters. And this was different. I mean, we had seen Superman movies like Iron Man 3 was, it was a different time for Marvel. It was much more of an exciting time for Marvel.
Sure.
But it was also the third Iron Man movie and like the sixth time we had seen Tony Stark in the MCU at that point.
Right.
This was, an original property, and there's nothing new about kaijus and giant
No.
robots either.
No.
But this was a new premise, a new setup within the stylings of something that we had seen before. And there's something about the lore that he sets up here and just how these performers really go for it. I think that's what separates Pacific Rim maybe from a lot of other summer fare where with these kind of movies, and I do think it's indicative when you look at the Godzilla movies, for example,
Right.
or the Independence Day resurgence nonsense that we saw. There's so
Just
much
bring that
summer
up.
fare. There's so much summer fare that comes out, and these actors want to get paid, and so they
Yeah.
go and get paid. And look, there's nothing fine with it. Most of the time, the performances are adequate.
Yeah.
The Jurassic World movies, fine. I don't think they're actively bad, but they're not great either. I think what separates Pacific Rim is that these actors are going for it. Like Idris Elba, I think without any sort of sense of irony, gives one of his best performances in this movie.
Such a hilarious thing
really
to say, but I don't necessarily disagree with that.
and he's done work where, that are certainly much more artistically, driven and have more integrity behind them.
Sure.
And he's great. He's a great performer, but there's something about the bombacity he brings to this, but also this tenacity that he brings to the Marshall character.
Right.
And the subtle pathos as well that I just think is really great. Rinko Kikuchi, I think, is really good in this film.
Yeah,
Charlie
true.
Day is having the time of his life. Ron Perlman is out of his mind. He's so crazy and fun here.
Yeah.
And then I think of, the relationship between Chuck and Hercules.
Mm-hmm.
And Max Martini is an actor that, no one will really know. He's not a household name by any stretch of the imagination. Even cinephiles, I don't know if they'll know him all that well. But he gives a performance here that I can't even begin to articulate. He is incredible in this movie. And to me, I think it says something about commitment and going for it despite the writing and how hollow it may be, because we're doing a blockbuster movie. We're not trying to win Oscars for performances or anything. But that moment at the elevator as we get to that final battle absolutely obliterates me. And every single time, and it's funny because I watched this was it last week when it was celebrating its anniversary.
Yeah.
My kids had already gone to bed, thank God. But it gets to that moment and I am uncontrollably sobbing in Pacific Rim.
You're adorable, man. You're adorable.
And it is so good. It is so good. And it's not as if the writing is anything noteworthy or that the film was trying to necessarily pull at the heartstrings, in ways it's not trying to be Manchester by the Sea.
Mm-hmm.
But it does say something about sincerity. And I do think that is perhaps the word that describes this film the most, is that Del Toro was being as sincere as possible and having a lot of fun. And I think that absolutely describes this movie. So there's something about Martini's sincerity and commitment, and the fact that he just goes for it, that this is the
Sure.
last time he will see his son, and he knows it. He's aware of it. And so he makes that known to the Marshall character, and it is heartbreaking. Like, it is so good. And I think part of it, to me, again, just it comes back to how often do we see these movies and they're so vapid and vacuous, and the performers don't care all that much. You know, like you get a million San Andreas's. And
this ain't a San Andreas.
Yeah, like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you watch San Andreas, and that film can be fine, but there's nothing in that film that makes you go, "Oh my God!" Like, I was really drawn to that performance, or I was really drawn to this movie.
No,
Like-
all
like-
that movie implies is that in natural disasters, they only happen to good-looking families.
Exactly. Like, you know, like you see those movies, and look, they can be brainless fun. I'm not necessarily taking that away, but that to me is the difference with Pacific Rim, is
Right.
that it has those kinds of moments where you're really drawn to it emotionally, or you're really drawn to it comedically, or you're just having the time of your life. And that is my experience with this film. I laughed with it. I surprisingly cry with it, you know, with that moment with Hercules and his son there.
Yeah.
And I also just have a lot of fun. Like that moment when, let me see, I'm trying to think of the characters' names here. When Mako, that's the Kenkuchi character,
Yeah.
and Raleigh, when they fight in Gypsy Danger for the first time, and there's something about the score here. Ramin Djawadi just freaking nails it. Like his score for
I
this
love
is
his
just
work.
a ton
Yeah,
of
his
fun.
work in general, I think, is great.
But there's something about the tone that Del Toro is messing around with there. So like as they get into that fight, and then Djawadi's score there is really amplifying it a lot as well. Like that, I just get giddy. I have a lot of fun, and again, the performers go for it, and they really bring this incredible sense of sincerity and stakes with it. So I mean, even though it's absurd and silly and ridiculous, like I'm just having a lot of fun, and you just don't always get that with Summer Fair. So like that to me is why I just love this movie so much.
It kind of takes us back to the conversation we were having around Barbie and Oppenheimer, or at least with Barbie specifically, that it feels like a big budget summer blockbuster film that was made by a filmmaker, right?
Yeah.
And say what you will about Pacific Rim, and I'll say this, you know, of Guillermo del Toro's entire filmography, he's had 12 films. I would probably rank Pacific Rim at number 11. But it makes me forget just how consistent his filmography is. I sometimes feel like or at least I take Guillermo del Toro for granted, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of incredible, because this is a very, very fun movie. It maybe gets a little long. I think really maybe the one thing that I have a slight reservation about is that I do sometimes feel the 2+ hour runtime, but I agree with everything that you're saying, that the thing that it has that most movies of its kind don't is not just a filmmaker with a real voice that imbues it 100%. It has a sincerity. It has a soul, right? And it actually cares about its characters, which is what we want to see about movies like this. And I really do enjoy this movie. It's been a few years since I've seen it. I didn't catch up with it for its 10-year anniversary, but I've seen it at least twice, and I've always had a good time with it.
Yeah, I think it's really great, and you know, it certainly has a lot of the thumbprint of what makes Del Toro great. Because I would argue the same thing really for like his Hellboy movies, for example, and those are movies that similarly can get quite absurd at times, but you're having a lot of fun because Del Toro just loves creating these characters.
Yeah.
And it means something to him. Like, he's not just phoning it in for a paycheck.
Right.
You know, I think that's why people were dying to see a Hellboy 3. And unfortunately, it never came. But like, people really
want to see it. I still want to see it. I mean, if we live in a world where people are talking about potentially getting a Sam Raimi directed Spider-Man 4, we could still get a Hellboy 3 here.
Honestly, it's funny because I saw that come up again.
Yeah.
Because what was it? Someone was talking about how like there were some rumors going around that he's working on it or whatever.
Yeah.
And look, it makes sense in the world we live in now with IP.
It does. It really does.
Like it is hilarious that all these years later 15, 20 years later, we're finally going to get Spider-Man 4
It's
or
finally
whatever.
here. Yep.
But with the world we live in now, could a Del Toro Hellboy 3 movie exist? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that comes up in the next few years.
I think it could. Yeah, for sure.
But I would say the same thing about those movies. Is just like once he decides to do a project, he goes all in, and he has a lot of fun doing it, and it's very felt. It's palpable when you're watching them. So I do love Pacific Rim, and I'm looking at his filmography here because it's interesting. You're talking about his ranking. I like it more than Nightmare Alley.
Okay.
I like it more than Hellboy 2. I probably like it more than Kronos, as much as I do really like Kronos quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I at least like it more than those movies. I don't know if it goes anything above that. Maybe Mimic. I'd have to rewatch Mimic, but I am a fan of it. I do like that movie a lot.
Mimic is the only one I don't really care for of his entire filmography. But I mean, apparently that's one where he was sort of like tied to the system in some ways. I
haven't seen that one in a long time.
Yeah, it does feel sort of like a like an interfered product, right? And we see that a lot with directors early on in their career that sort of tap into the studio system for the first or second time, and they essentially get taken advantage of. Mimic kind of has a similar like Alien 3 energy with how that film was to David Fincher as Mimic is to Guillermo del Toro. And I think the film suffers because of that. But if I were to remove Mimic, this is why I say I sometimes take Del Toro for granted, because removing Mimic, I don't dislike any of his movies. In fact, all of them, I think I might give a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd, maybe a 3.5 at worst, which is he now officially one of my favorite directors? Now that I never really thought about
He's
that.
always been a favorite of mine. I mean, when I think of like Blade 2, I think is incredible. Like that's a really great movie. The Devil's Backbone, we're going to get to 2001 here very soon. And spoiler alert, that's one of the best films of that year.
That's my favorite Del Toro film. I'll just say that right now.
I love it as well. Pan's Labyrinth was in my top 3 for 2006. It might have even been my number 2, if I remember correctly. But I love that movie. I loved Crimson Peak as well.
You know, I didn't love it at the time, but that one has grown on me a lot with time.
I've really come to like that one a lot. And look, I defend The Shape of Water. That's one of those movies that, again, turning art into sports, it's a victim of that. The only reason I think people criticize that film as heavily as they do is because it freaking won Best Picture. If it never won Best Picture, the best thing that ever happened to La La Land is that it lost the movie.
Yeah.
I will say that forever. Because
why isn't that one of our
anymore.
T-shirts? That should be one of our T-shirts, right?
Honestly, I'm going to make that T-shirt.
Okay, yeah, please do.
I really should, because that, like, people when people talk about La La Land these days, honestly it's more from a positive light of like, I love that movie, and you really don't have people harping on it anymore because it lost. And people are harping on it because they wanted Moonlight to win. So it was the best thing that ever happened. And it's why I was scared to death about, Everything Everywhere All at Once winning Best Picture last year, because the inevitable, jabbing of the knife at that movie incessantly forever and ever and ever is going to happen. I don't know if it got to the extreme as something like a La La Land, thankfully, but it was my biggest fear. And I think The Shape of Water is absolutely a victim of that. If that film had lost Best Picture to something else, nobody talks about it.
Might be
Nobody
talking about it in
cares.
some underrated classic or something like that.
Exactly. It just becomes Guillermo del Toro has an Oscar-nominated movie for Best Picture. Isn't that exciting? We love that.
Yeah.
Like, it would, like, everybody would praise the film of like, oh yeah, like, he got an Oscar-nominated film for Best Picture. Good for him.
Yeah.
A different film won Best Picture, but at least he got nominated. Like, that would be the discourse. But unfortunately, it's much more harsh than that because it actually won. But I do think it is a good movie. It's in my top 20 of that year. And I love how, like, to me, I think it is a great Best Picture winner when we're looking at it historically, because it's about a woman falling in love with a fish. Like,
I've done that too.
I mean, like, that is so weird and bizarre. And there's something about its elegance and its poetry, but it's got the Del Toro politics and weird characters. And it's not your conventional Oscar winner. Like if that film came out in 1999, it doesn't even touch the Academy Awards, let alone win.
I wonder if many members of the Academy probably wouldn't have even seen it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that film only wins because it comes out in 2017 when, society had evolved and there was a transition in 2016 to make the Academy much more inclusive.
Sure.
That's the only reason. I mean, hell, if it came out a few years earlier in 2014 or 13 or 12, it doesn't sniff the Oscars. It wouldn't. It was a very different Academy. So like, I think The Shape of Water absolutely deserves more respect than it gets.
Well, and that's the thing we need to acknowledge is that Guillermo del Toro has straddled the line beautifully between like these art house films with like not monster films, but blockbuster films, right?
Yeah.
And weirdly, like you look at Hellboy or even Hellboy 2, and it sounds like I like Hellboy 2 a lot more than you. That's of his blockbusters, that's my favorite. That's in my top 5 of his movies. But still, you take that and you compare it to something like The Shape of Water or even a Pan's Labyrinth. They clearly come from the same mind. I mean, it's not even close. And even Pacific Rim kind of falls into that spectrum. Like, Del Toro has never veered away from his ethos. Even like a little bit, he hasn't. Like, everything about his filmography still screams him, despite him catering to maybe a different audience or a different cinematic marketing goal, right? And that's really the charm of his entire filmography. I know we were talking about Pacific Rim as like the basis of this segment, and I love that it's sort of turning into a unofficial Guillermo del Toro retrospective.
It really has.
But I think it's appropriate given the fact that Pacific Rim could have easily fallen into what you were talking about, that category of just big studio fluff for the sake of filling out a slot in a weekend. Right?
Yeah.
He could have easily been a director for hire for something like this. And that wasn't the case with it.
Absolutely. Like he wants to make the movies that he cares about. And he loves his horror. He loves his monsters. He loves these quirky characters and he puts a lot of passion into every single one of them, because I'm with you. I like all of these movies to one degree or another.
Yeah.
To your point on Mimic, I haven't seen that film in so long. I'd really have to revisit it, but I liked it the first time I saw it.
Yeah.
I loved Kronos actually. And that's one I caught up with. I think.
Yeah,
in
that's an interesting movie. Really interesting movie.
Because Del Toro was one of the very first movie series we ever did back in 2013.
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, it might have been the second one we did that year, like ever. I think it was the second one we ever did. If I remember correctly.
Yeah, that was still before my time, so I can't confirm that.
Yeah, I know it was that year. I'm just trying to remember the order. But at any rate, we did it in 2013, and that's where I caught up with, some of these blind spots. And obviously, since then, he's Pacific Rim, Crimson Peak, Shape of Water, Nightmare Alley, and Pinocchio have all come out during our time. So we got to see and review those in
got some good movies there. Yeah. Wonder what he's going to do next. Wonder what he's going to do next.
Yeah. I don't know, but I really love Del Toro. He is genuinely one of my favorites, and Pacific Rim is quintessentially why, because it's a really fun movie that wears its heart on its sleeve.
Right.
It has a lot of fun, and it has these committed performances that you just don't get in your typical summer fare. That goes a long way for me. I mean, I truly believe Idris Elba here. And it's interesting because, like, I don't know if I would have said that in 2013, but in 2023, given what I've seen from Idris Elba, at least in terms of film, I haven't seen the Luther Show or whatever it's called. And I hear he's great in that. But in terms of film, from what I've seen, I mean, that's up there for me. Like he truly goes for it, and he's really fantastic, as is all of this cast. And Charlie Hunnam, I think, is also one of those guys where in 2013 his reputation wasn't great, and I probably wasn't the kindest to him in 2013. However, like he has such a unique style of acting that I think I became much more warm to with some of his later films.
Yeah.
Especially with like The Lost City of Z, or I think
love that. Yeah.
The King Arthur movie that he did. Like some of the stuff that he did later that I ended up really liking, I started to realize like this guy has a different style of acting, and it's not necessarily going to win him Oscars. I'm not saying he's like an Adam Driver. He's not one of the best that we have, but I think he's good. I think he's better than what his reputation was in 2014.
He has stood out a lot in a lot of his films, even in very small roles. Like I think I even remember him. I remember how frightening he was in something like Children of Men, for instance. And he has a very inconsequential part, right? And yet there's something kind of memorable about that. So you're right. I think you make a great point that that this actor has been he's really been wildly consistent over the past couple of years, and at least consistent in the sense that when he's in a movie, he never half-asses it, and he usually finds some way to stand out. Because I think Lost City of Z is a gorgeous movie. I love his
agree,
performance
and he's very good in it. Yeah, like his little role in Crimson Peak, even. Yeah, I really liked. So
true.
Yeah, I mean, he's an actor I've come to, I've warmed up to.
Yeah.
And revisiting Pacific Rim through that lens, I actually really liked his performance much more on this rewatch.
Sure.
Because you're like, oh, that's the guy that I've actually come to really like. He was there the whole time. I just, when you're first seeing it the first time, it just seems a little bizarre, like it's a different realm of acting.
Right.
But once you warm up to his style, if it's something that you're willing to kind of embrace as I have, like, it's good. And I think he's really fun in Pacific Rim, and he has a nice chemistry with Rinko Kikuchi. So
yeah, I agree. Good partnership there.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Anyway, happy 10 years to Pacific Rim. Good movie. Back when blockbusters still, were, like Barbie, made by actual filmmakers that, made their own movies too.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that, we will begin to end the show here. Want to say a thank you to all of our patrons. Really do appreciate you guys. We cannot do this without you. And I guess a little bit of a tease, because moving forward, Brendan and I have devised a way where we're going to give you guys some exclusive content, hopefully weekly.
Yeah.
As it relates to, doing these shows and offering some behind the scenes. So if you want to sign up at patreon.com/InSessionFilm, we're hoping that we're going to have some content that's up there, every week. And that's going to be the goal. So you can sign up there for as low as $1 a month. Really helps us out. We have podcast reviews of Barbie and Oppenheimer. Those are up. Please go and check those out. If you missed our review of Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning Part 1, that's also available. So you can go and see that. Same thing with our video reviews. We have one up for Mission Impossible, hopefully one for Barbie soon. And friend of the show, Jay Ledbetter, he will have a video review for Oppenheimer soon. So you can go and check that out on our YouTube page. Women in Session, their latest episode, they did their underrated 1980s movies. It was a lot of fun.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, daunting task, but really great show. And they will have some bonus content. A couple of them got together to give their thoughts on Barbie as well. And that is coming soon. So please go and check out all that content. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitter, if it still exists, Twitter X. I'm not even sure what they can label it anymore.
So we're not going to be tweeting anymore. We're going to be zeeting with the. Is that how you pronounce that? I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. Who knows? Anyway, Twitter, Xing, whatever it's called, we're there. Instagram, we're there. Blue Sky. What else?
Threads. Did you say Threads already? Okay.
YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe, hit the like button, all that fun stuff. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. Please rate and review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that fun stuff as well. And we have a bunch of written content
Yes.
at InSessionFilm.com. Brendan, any final thought before we get out of here?
I feel like we're in a stage in life right now, JD, where there was pre-Barbenheimer and there's post-Barbenheimer.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel sad now.
It.
I feel sad.
I know. But hopefully the rest of the year, hopefully these studios end this strike soon and we can get back to the cinema.
Back to the movies. Yeah. Let's see good movies for once.
Anyway, Pacific Rim was great. Go and watch it. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, Barbenheimer. We love you.
We love you too.